Welcome. Hi. Welcome to Viewpoint. Viewpoint's mission is to bring you programmings that will entertain, educate, and inspire you, the public, on issues facing our community as well as our nation. For example, issues on education, legislation, addiction, and health, to name a few. So join us with our guests as they share their life experiences, the joys, and the heartaches with you, our viewing public. And tonight, our first topic is addiction and how it affects the marriage. And joining me are our guests, Joan Pozner, Stephen and Susan Salomone. So the first thing is, how did addiction come into your family? If you could share that with us.
Lily,
Susan.
thanks so much for having us on Viewpoint. We're so happy that you had this program because we have a lot to share about it. We were first exposed to addiction in our family when my son Justin was 16 years old and he started smoking pot. At that time, we did not realize the journey that we would be going through. But over the next 13 years, our son progressed from marijuana to cocaine, to OxyContin, to heroin, and at age 29, he passed away from a heroin overdose.
Joan, can you explain to us a little bit about how addiction came to your family and your home?
I have 4 daughters. My second oldest daughter struggles and she smoked pot like Justin at age 16 and went away to college, and her journey continued during that time, and then went to oxycodone and then heroin. And she is still, she's working on her journey and recovering now in a long-term treatment facility.
Thank you. You know, working with families in treatment, families come in and more times than not, there's one family member that says, you know, pot's no big deal, it's not addictive, it's only drinking, it's a phase, they'll grow out of it. All their friends are smoking pot or drinking. And I think, you know, does that color or influence how you parent, if those were any of your thoughts? Steve, what about you?
Well, actually, Lily, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we grew up in our age group in a culture of acceptance of drug use, experimentation. It was called recreational drug use, was a rite of passage. So I think as we became young parents and our children started to grow up to be of age, that they would experiment, we were more accepting of it. And I remember when we first found marijuana on him, I remember distinctly how I felt was that, you know, he was sort of like doing the same thing I did, and it was okay because I was successful and everything had worked out okay for me. Little did I understand at that point that experimenting was not an option for my son because he had the addiction gene, so to speak, or predisposition to become addicted. And that was the beginning of his demise, was the fact that he now was starting to experiment with drugs. And as Susan, you know, went on to explain, it progressed fairly rapidly as he went from one drug to the next, because as somebody that was predisposed to abuse drugs, which is really what his makeup was like, he was always looking for the next, you know, more extreme way to get high, and it ended up being heroin, and it led to his death.
And I'd like to add to that, Lily. I remember when my son, he got arrested at age 19, and I remember going to lunch with a friend of mine who I knew pretty well. We were business associates, but I knew her pretty well. And I told her the story of what happened with Justin, and he was 19 then. And she said to me, "He's going to be fine. He has your DNA." And, you know, I really thought he was going to be fine, too. I thought that, you know, this was just experimenting. He was look at me, I survived.
Right.
You know, I have 4 children. I made it through. He's going to make it through, too. I really believe that. And I think that definitely did color our initial intervention of the problem.
Joan?
We didn't realize that especially because now these opiates are out And it's likely that if you're going to experiment with drugs, you're going to end up with an opiate at some point. It just, that's what's out there.
Right.
That the rules are a little bit different, and that these children that are predisposed to maybe going a little too far, once the opiate gets introduced into their brains, there's no turning back. And I think that was the turning point for us.
And Joan, do you think your experiences of growing up, I guess in the 60s, where things were a little different culturally, did that impact how you first saw this enter into your home? You and your
I think
husband?
so. I came up a little bit later. Mine was more in the 70s, but that's all right. No,
Don't brag,
truthfully,
Joan.
truthfully, what I think is, we had been, I had an older daughter. Unlike Justin being the firstborn, mine is the second. And so we went through all the steps, and experimentation, my husband and I, myself in college, and then my daughter, my oldest daughter did the college drinking and everything. And so I wasn't really, I didn't understand that she had this gene that was going to take her somewhere else. It was, her path wasn't going to be what ours was.
And I think also in working with people suffer from the addiction, we never realized it was a brain disease when we were growing up. It was like, put it down, you'll be finished when you're finished, and that'll be that. And we never realized how the true impact on our brain that was keeping us out there using. Can you share a little bit?
Could I say
Go,
something
sure,
about
please,
that, Lily?
absolutely, jump right in.
Even when we were going through this with Justin, we didn't know it was a brain disease.
Right.
Okay, we didn't know it was a brain disease until after Justin passed away, and we started our organization, Drug Crisis in Our Backyard, and we began to learn more and more about addiction. Because when we were in the process, we were just looking to figure out a way to get him better.
Right, right.
And we definitely didn't think it was a disease. I would like to say that. We definitely thought it was an issue of moral character and self-control.
Look at that.
We fell into this. I think that's the trap that a lot of parents are falling into now, is they think that they can, logically work with someone to convince them to make a better choice. And that's not really what it's about, as we know now, looking back and having talked to a lot of people that are confused about why they can't sit down and rationalize with somebody that's addicted. Why are you doing this? You're ruining your life. Can't you see it? Well, yes, they can see it, but they're in the throes of an illness, of a disease, and that's what we didn't realize. And I think if we realized it early on, we might have taken a different path and maybe been more successful.
And I think that's another thought is, I know hindsight is 20/20, looking back, how did this impact your relationship? And I know your husband's not here to join us, but how did this impact your relationship with your husband and the other siblings, the family members?
It's been a difficult journey for all of us. It took us a long time to get on the same page. Which of course created a lot of dissension in our household. My theory of dealing with it was in your face. Let's go. We got to go to rehab after rehab after rehab, and I ended up being the parent who drove to rehab, sat in the emergency rooms for hours at a time, or at a rehab center for hours at a time, and it wore on me somewhere around the 7th or 8th time, and so my husband and I actually started marriage counseling, and he's not here today because he's working.
Yes,
so,
thank you.
but. It's been a process, and at first we thought it was somewhat of a weakness to have to go to a therapist, and frankly, it probably saved our marriage. In terms of my other daughters, it's a very difficult. I can imagine it's a very difficult thing to watch their sister really almost kill herself, and be hopeful. That have hope every time she goes to rehab, but the hope, they lose hope when there's a relapse and a relapse and a relapse. Right now we're on the 14th rehab, and it's been a long journey, and it's hard, and so I spend time with my daughter who suffers, and then my other daughters have a resentment because why are you spending time with her? Let her go. And I think it's difficult. Unless you're a parent They don't understand. So I take it from that point of view. You're not a parent yet, and one day you may understand.
Right.
And the other point, my strongest feeling is, in an explanation to my daughters who are healthy, I say, if you were dying, I would want to be with you.
Right.
Because
Right.
frankly,
This is a disease.
I feel this one daughter is dying.
Right.
And until there's still hope,
Right.
but this disease, the recovery success rate
Right.
is very low.
Right.
So, and I will continue to try to support her recovery,
Right.
not
Thank you.
support her addiction.
Thank you. And I guess that's a real fine line when this is in your home, to separate this disease of addiction from the person that you love. And for you, you have other sons in the house, and it probably impacted them also.
It did, and you don't realize it when you're going through it because you're trying to take care of the crisis all the time, and that's exactly how we dealt with it. We did, do some family therapy, which was helpful, but I found it was kind of remarkable, some of the things that came out during the therapy, what our children were experiencing. And I remember thinking, wow, I didn't even realize that they were going through this torment. And they wanted so badly to keep everything normal in the household, in a sense, and so they were not given. There was like almost a no tolerance for them, in a sense, that God forbid they were to do something out of the ordinary or wrong or get in trouble.
Right.
We were, our cup had runneth over.
Right.
We were too full,
Right.
and it wasn't. That's not fair for them.
Right.
It's not a healthy way to grow up. So, again, message to parents, which is what Viewpoint's all
That's
about,
right.
is it's the addictions is something that the whole family is suffering from, and beyond the family, but specifically the family and the siblings, and you need to look at the whole the family holistically and think about what's happening here, and not just react to the crisis at hand all the time.
And that's very easy to say now that we're
Right.
not in it anymore.
Right.
My son has passed 3 years ago, but when we were in the midst of it, I have to tell you that I feel like our house had a tornado going through it all the time.
Right.
We have, as I said, 4 children. Justin was my oldest. He was 10 years older than my youngest. So this really started when Dylan was 9. And Dylan went to a Catholic school, and he was just so naive. He was just like so naive that when Justin got arrested at 19, Dylan was like in shock because Justin was his model. It was his older brother. And it was very difficult for Dylan. And it was difficult for all of them, and for us too. But Dylan went through the entire thing because the other kids left for college. And so they got out.
Right.
And then would come back on, break.
Right.
And they'd come back less and less on
Right.
break because there was always a crisis in the house. I mean, if it wasn't going on, we were just waiting for it to
Right.
go on.
Right.
And it was awful. But thank God they all got through it. And they're, doing okay now. They're all doing great. And actually, I think this is the first year that I see some healing for all 3 of them. I see that, they're getting better too now, as we are. Our marriage was, I don't even know how we made it through in retrospect.
Well, we pulled together. That was part of it. We were kind of on a mission, but it can be very stressful to the marriage, and we're going to talk about that, I know, in a minute, about being aligned with each other in your philosophy. But the children, they came through it okay. In some senses, Dylan has written, some pieces that we've read where it actually, his perspective on it was impressive, that he, it built character of him. But to read the struggles that were going on in his mind at the time, it was heartbreaking.
I was
to be
going to say it
honest
had
with
to be
you. It's
heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. And you touched on subjects where you're so focused on helping this one person, we don't mean to leave the other ones out. And that's what happens with this disease when it comes into the home. And you shared something about you not being on the same page. Can you share a little bit what brought you two to the same page, you and your husband?
We took turns being on, and it took a long period of time. As I said before, I'm more in your face, and my husband is more subtle.
Got it.
And although we were both profoundly affected, and some days you have to keep yourself so busy that you don't even want to have time to talk about it.
Right.
But it is so pressing on your mind, and sometimes the silence is deafening.
Right.
So it was, I missed your original.
That's okay.
I lost my thought, I'm
That's
sorry.
all right. That's all right. And this does kick up a lot of stuff. And it almost sometimes brings you right back to the place. So I guess the question is, from not being on the same page, when do you come together and say, look, we might have different views or different thoughts, but we need to, because I guess that's the message also out there telling parents, you have to be on the same page. There can't be a division, because while you guys are fighting over this, that disease is working overtime on your kid and your loved ones, pushing them out there to go.
Well, actually, the person that's suffering from the addiction, usually they're pretty insightful about those kind of things. And so I found with Justin, I was more in the relationship, more tolerant of the drug use. And, I remember when his therapist said, we're fighting for your son's life, I thought he was being dramatic. And I didn't realize at the time he was actually being literal. He was worried that my son was going to die. That was the furthest thing from my mind. So I was more tolerant, and I thought at times Susan was overreacting when she said he needs to go away. I thought that's crazy. It's just something that he's going to deal with and handle. But my point is that the person that's suffering, the addict, they're very crafty at using that as a lever, because they know that if they can get the parents to be in disagreement, that takes the focus away from them. Right. And now the parents can bicker about what's got to be done and what's not got to be done, and they can be free to do what it is that they want to do. Right. And it's actually amazing how crafty they can be about that. And Justin was good at speaking with me on the side and letting me know that everything was okay. It wasn't a big serious issue. You got to calm mom down. I mean, it was he was divisive in our relationship, and it wasn't until we saw a real deterioration in him that I realized that he was manipulating me at that point. And so we did get on the same page. Unfortunately, it was a little bit late, but hopefully through a program like this, maybe others listen to this and maybe make a different decision.
Thank you. Susan, any thoughts?
I think that I agree totally with what Steve said. We were really facing in opposite directions. And we were fighting all the time about what to do about Justin. What do we do about Justin? And I don't think this is that different than any other disease. Right. I think that when children are sick, that families are dysfunctional, and that the parents are going to focus on that sick child, whether they have cancer or whether they have addiction, any life-threatening illness. But in this case, there are many different ways to deal with this disease, because there were so many ideas about what it is, the stigma attached to it. Is it a disease? Is it a choice? And we were definitely facing in opposite directions. We really didn't get on the same page until Justin had a brain injury. And that was really pretty late. And that was 7 months before he passed away. And at that point, we were facing in the same direction. But it certainly took long enough to do that. And this is a program where we hope we can help other people learn something from our experiences right here. That's why we're telling our story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lily, I think that I like to make this point a lot. A lot of people in the community, I think you'd have to be living in isolation to not realize that we have a problem. But I think most people are not recognizing the fact that the problem really, they need to be looking inwardly into their own families, because it is that close. And I think there's a lot of denial out there still. And a lot of people don't realize that it could be their kids at risk.
Right. That's right. Go on. What were you going to say, Joe?
I was going to say that I think, and I've seen this in attending programs like Naranon, and as well as the Drug Crisis Spotlight and Recovery Support Group, and I experienced it myself. I think that there is an innate difference between a father and a mother, or in my house, between a mom and a dad. I think there are times when instinctually we're not supposed to tell our children, you got to go. You have to get out. And that's where my husband and I went back and forth with the decision of, I think she should get out, and then at one point he thought she should get out, and I wanted to hold on to her. And I think it's an internal struggle. For me, it was an internal struggle. Is the best thing for her to move out and deal with this, or should we love her? Not that we're not loving her if she moves out, but love her to health. But I've learned I can't love someone to health. because that's not how it works. But I know for a mom, it's hard to deal with your spouse and when you have your own internal struggle of what should I do, what should I do, and and my husband and I, that's where we agree. We think it's different from our mom and a dad perspective, and the love is still the same. The desire to support recovery is still the same. I think it just
How you handle it is sometimes a little different.
Moms have a different emotion in there.
I like to liken it to a mother bear and her cubs. That is all, when I think about it, that's what I think. That anything else is secondary. The husband, forget it. Is secondary. This is my my cub.
Right.
I have to protect this cub. Right. It is instinctual, and that's why this goes so against our instinct to take care of our child when they're so terribly sick. And tell them to leave. I mean, it's so difficult to do. I couldn't do it.
The problem is that as we know, because we've all been through it, you can't make someone better.
I know.
You could wish it as much as you want, and you could try to force it, but the bottom line is you can't. So as a parent, it's difficult and heartbreaking because the person that's addicted has to make themselves better. Right. You can lead them to water, but you can't make them drink, as they say, of course. And I think addiction is the epitome of that. You can't force someone to be better. You can enable them or give them the vehicles and the tools, but they got to use the tools. And as a parent, you want to make everything right, but you can't in this case.
And I think, we've talked about so many things, and I think that the community, a lot of people still think of this, it's a stigma, it's moral, why don't they just get better? They have to just make better choices. And for a lot of people dealing with this in the home, I think we keep it a secret because of what other people are going to think out there in the community. And I think that stops us sometimes from speaking about, and that's why with what you guys did with Drug Crisis in Our Backyard is bringing it to the forefront and saying, this is what's going on. And by coming here and sharing your experiences is telling people, look, you can't hide it. You got to look inside and say, what's going on? Open up the curtains.
And even within the family. I mean, I think there's a predisposition to, the cliche is the white elephant in the room. There's a predisposition to not talk about this in the family because you think maybe that your 8-year-old doesn't know what's going on. They know what's going on. As a matter of fact, it's worse because they're making stuff up.
Right.
So you might as well just let's have the conversation with the kids. Your brother or sister is having an issue with trying to make them better. So much better than letting them fantasize and make up whatever it is they're making up because they know something's wrong.
Right, and not including them in the family dynamics. Probably, as you talked about Dylan's writings, probably shared some of that, their own fear of not knowing what's going on and thinking.
Joan, did you try to keep it quiet from your other kids?
I couldn't keep it quiet. I chose not to. And one, because I knew my older daughter, is 29 years old. So, and this started very severe 3 years ago. So, but had been going on for years. And I thought my oldest daughter could maybe talk to her sister and affect some change. I wanted my younger daughters to know because I'm scared. I don't want that to happen to them. 5 years ago, August, I lost my sister to this disease at 51 years old. So there's obviously in our family a genetic component, and I want them to know this is your history. Please be careful, watch yourselves. So we kind of did talk about it. We still do talk about it, and I try to be supportive and offered them programs. They weren't receptive. My youngest daughter went to Alateen, but other than that, the other two didn't want to participate in a support group for family.
Nor did ours.
Yeah, I remember sitting down with my kids. You remember sitting down in the family room? Justin was still alive. He was pretty sick though. He didn't have the brain injury yet, and I took out the Al-Anon literature and said, this is a program that might help you. They were laughing at me. It's like, but then afterwards, at some point, I think it was after Justin passed away, they started reading the Melody
Melody Beatty.
Codependence No More. Codependence No More, Melody Beatty. And they shared it amongst the three of them, shared it with each other because, you know, it became quite apparent at that point. They lost their brother. And
Yeah, it doesn't get worse than that, I guess.
No, it doesn't. And I just want to, I can't thank you enough for coming here, being on our premiere show. This is our first show. Coming
Thank
in
you.
We're happy to
Thank
kick
you.
the show, the program off with you.
Thank you. Just sharing it and letting families out there know that there is help. They don't have to do it in isolation. If anything that they've heard today's show, please just, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help. There's so much
There's,
help
you know,
out there.
unfortunately,
out.
there's no rule book,
There's
there's
no-
no right or wrong,
There's not.
but the best you can hope to do is at least talk about it, and that's the best that you can hope for right now. There's no black and white
There's
answer to
nothing.
this,
There's
unfortunately.
nothing. There's nothing. And thanks again for sharing your story. It's been wonderful, and hopefully someone out there will hear this and say, that's me, that's us, that's our home. Let me reach out and get help. And thank you for sharing your personal experiences.
Thanks
as
for having the
painful as
show.
they
Thank
were.
you.
Thank you.